Hello, everyone, and welcome to Facebook Live with the Horticulturists. We are back again today to answer your gardening questions. So if you have a lingering gardening question or something you need help with, put it into the comment box. You can send photos to our messages on the main extension page, and we'll get those answered today. My name is Candice Hart. I'm the Illinois State Master Gardener Specialist located here in Central Illinois. And my specialty is flowers, cut flowers, annuals, perennials. That's the things I like to grow in my garden. I also have two of my great colleagues here today as well.
Hi, my name is Kelly Allsup, and I'm a horticulture educator based out of Bloomington. And my specialty is insects and integrated pest management. Like Ryan, I like growing vegetables.
Very good.
And I'm Ryan Pankau, horticulture educator right here in Champaign-Urbana. My specialty is probably woody plants. I have degrees in forestry. I've spent a lot of time working in arboriculture. So like Kelly, I'm also interested in growing vegetables. So I grow a lot of those myself. So
Cool. Okay. Well, I'm sure we'll touch on all of those topics today with your guys' questions. So just start typing in those into the comment box whenever you have one. But we're going to kick off with some of the things that we brought today. Just things that are going on out in the garden, things that we're getting ready for this time of year. And I know Kelly's going to tell us a little bit more about bulbs, because this is the time of year for spring flowering bulbs.
It is definitely the time to go into the garden centers and buy your bulbs before they're all gone. But today I wanted to go through a couple of truths and myths of planting spring bulbs. So we know in the horticulture world, some information's been passed down and it's not completely research based. And so I wanted to blow some of those myths out of the water. Okay. Here we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a statement. And then maybe Ryan or Candice can comment, and then we will tell you if it's a myth or a truth. Okay. The first thing I'm going to say is bulbs go into dormancy in late spring, and they don't wake up until the very next spring. Is that a myth or a truth?
I'm going to go with a myth.
I'll have to agree with the myth.
Okay, that is a myth, correct.
Way to go.
So bulbs actually start growing their roots again in the fall, which is why in the fall it is important to water and even sometimes do a fertilizer of some of your bulbs. And they're using that early fall to obtain some nutrients and moisture so they can flower. Mm-hmm. And if you have grape hyacinths, you can go out into your garden right now and see that strappy foliage coming up through the mulch or the soil, whatever you have.
And that's totally normal. They should be.
That is totally normal. That's what they're supposed to be doing.
Very cool. Very cool.
Okay. The best time to plant bulbs is as early as possible, so there's lots of time to form roots.
Myth.
I'll agree with Candice. Myth.
I'm going to let you go first.
You guys can't be right all the time.
I'm going to let him go first.
I say it's the truth. However, there's two truths. It really is, good to plant them early because you want to get lots of root growth before winter comes.
True.
However, there is a issue with planting too early, and that is fusarium wilt. Mm-hmm. And that causes lots of issues with bulbs. Maybe you have yellowing or browning leaves or discoloration or even reduced flower emergence. That might mean you have fusarium. So the best time to plant bulbs is the month of October, not September, October. I did buy my bulbs in September, but I will wait until October to plant those.
So wait a couple weeks, then start to get them in the ground.
Okay.
And if you're just joining us, and we've got some new viewers, Kelly is talking about myths and truth when it comes to bulbs, because this is the time of year to talk about spring flowering bulbs. So keep it coming, Kelly.
Okay, so we know that our bulbs are growing are starting to resume their growth here in the fall. We know that we know that October is the best time to plant. Okay, Spring bulbs require added nutrients, particularly phosphorus, at the time of planting so that they can promote good root growth.
Ryan, you go first.
So phosphorus at the time of planting, so in the fall.
So we always hear that we're supposed to put bone meal in the bottom of the hole of the bulb.
Yeah, I've heard that for most of my life, so I'll say that's true.
And I'm going to say myth because I feel like there's already some in the soil.
I agree with Candice. It is a myth.
Woohoo!
Phosphorus is not really one of those nutrients that is easily translocated out. So you probably do have phosphorus in the soil. Probably don't need to add that phosphorus. But the really cool thing to know is by adding bone meal, you're actually preventing phosphorus uptake.
What?
Because if you've ever heard the word mycorrhizae, mycorrhizae are these fun little fungi that are symbiotic with plant roots. And these little mycorrhizae fungi help the plants absorb nutrients and water. And then the plants give the fungi carbs. So these fungi actually, the roots will produce a little exude that will in turn increase the fungi to attach to the roots. However, if you add phosphorus, the roots will not produce that exude and you will not get the roots to attach to the mycorrhizae. And the mycorrhizae are much more efficient in taking up phosphorus than you adding phosphorus to the planting hole.
Interesting.
Very good.
Wouldn't have known that. Huh. And this is all relatively new research that you're all sharing, right?
Yeah, in the past
New to us,
5
at
to
least,
10
yeah.
years, for sure. Just really cool to understand that, sometimes what our grandma tells us is not always the
Not
truth.
necessary.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, if you're just joining us, we're talking about myths and truth when it comes to spring flowering bulbs. If you've got questions, start adding them into those comment box. But I think we've got a couple more myths and truths about bulbs.
You cannot grow bulbs in containers.
I guess I'm on the hook for this one.
You go first.
I'm going to call that one a myth because I
Same
have not
here.
ever seen that happen.
Going for a myth.
So
It is a myth because you can grow bulbs in containers.
Definitely.
And you can even layer them in different ways. You just need to make sure that container has excellent drainage. Otherwise, the bulbs will rot. And then you need to, give that container somewhat of a protected location. Otherwise, they will freeze. And that's why one of the things that we do when we do plant bulbs is, as horticulturists, we encourage you to mulch 2 to 3 inches on top of those bulbs so that you help with the temperature fluctuations. But, you can layer bulbs like daffodils below crocuses because those crocuses will come up before the daffodils. You can do tulips and hyacinths, and you can do a fritillary in the middle. And the bigger pots are normally safer than smaller pots because they take much longer to freeze. And if you really feel like it is getting really, really cold, and I know this might be a job, but you could potentially move that container into your garage.
give it a little protection. Yep.
Cool. Yeah, I've done that in the fall. Do kind of a lasagna bulb garden, and it's super fun.
Yeah,
We've got a question come in from Christine. She asked about, I think this is when you were talking about bone meal. She asked, what about bulb tone? I'm not sure what is in the fertilizer. Are you familiar with bulb tone? I'm not either. I think it's a brand of bulb fertilizer. And I would say if it's just a fertilizer, fine. But like you're kind of reading about that bone meal, not necessarily required, right?
I do. I have heard about fertilizing in the fall and watering in the fall. But I do know that Martha Smith, which is our kind of bulb guru in extension, does do a 10-10-10 fertilizer in the spring before they bloom. Other than that, I almost don't know if you would need the fertilizer, because I say you could fertilize in the fall, but then you're still messing with that mycorrhizal interaction.
Yeah. I'll have to be honest. I've never fertilized any of the areas where I've had spring bulbs, and they do fine. And maybe you would get more growth if you did fertilize, but I don't. Yeah, not necessarily necessary. Yeah, that's a great question, Christine.
But no, I do not know what the ingredient is in bulb tone.
Yeah, we'd have to look at the label and find out. Yeah. Great question.
Okay, here's the next one. Spring flowering bulbs will not grow in shade.
Well, I would say that's a myth.
That's definitely a myth, I think.
Absolutely a myth.
Totally.
Spring flowering bulbs, they're ephemerals, which means they come up and die back. And most of the time, these bulbs are coming up before the trees leaf out. Especially a tree that leaves out late. That would be a perfect tree to plant under bulbs under. So, stuff like grape hyacinth or crocus or winter aconite, which is this beautiful little yellow buttercup present in the middle of winter.
Love those in the spring.
I stopped the car to go look at those. Snowdrops and Siberian squill can be planted under deciduous trees, and even snowdrops and Siberian squill will be just fine underneath conifer trees. So you have two really good options, even under a conifer tree.
So probably some of their strategy as plants from the wild is to leaf out earlier than trees, or have leaf production earlier than trees, so they can grab some.
Yeah, because many of these I'm sure would grow natively in a woodland area. So
I'm just thinking about like our spring wildflowers that you see in the forest. I mean, that's some of the reason why they bloom so early is to capture sunlight before the trees leaf out.
Absolutely. So that's kind of the bulbs are ephemerals, just like some of those spring ephemerals that Ryan's talking about. What's your favorite spring ephemeral?
Oh, I really like the spring beauties. That's one of my
love them
favorites
too.
in there.
Yeah, those are great.
Bluebells are maybe a little bit later, but that's probably my second favorite. And probably because I have a lot of those on my property is the reason why.
They're wonderful. I love like bluebells. Love my bluebells. Okay.
And bluebells do well in cultivation.
True.
Yeah, you can actually... don't want to deplete native stands of those, but you can actually cultivate and grow bluebells in your garden.
You can. Cool. What else you got?
Okay, is it my last one? My last one, then, Candice and I can touch on a few of the basics of planting bulbs.
I've got another question, too.
Tulip bulbs should be planted 6 to 8 inches below the surface.
What do you think, Ryan?
I have to admit, I don't know the exact depth. That sounds about right. I'll say that's a truth.
I'm going to say myth. It seems a little deep to me.
Mildew.
What do you think?
It is a myth. But that's what we've always been taught in the gardening world. Plant your tulip bulbs 6 to 8 inches. Plant your bulbs maybe 2 to 3 times the height of the bulb, and you'll be more successful. However, Cornell University did a study where they top planted tulips, which means they only planted them 2 to 4 inches deep. And what they found was that they had more flowers than the ones that were planted 6 inches or deeper. So I'm actually saving you work. When you're out there with 25 tulip bulbs and you have to dig a hole 8 inches deep, it is daunting.
A pain.
Now, 2 to 4 inches is all you have to dig, and you'll actually get more flowers. And then I just wanted to touch on tulips. A tulip bulb can sometimes be hard for gardeners in Illinois. And when you plant this tulip bulb, you're going to plant, of course, the top is the top. The little pointy thing is the top. You're going to plant that top 2 to 4 inches deep. But when it flowers, you're going to end up with a little depression in that flowering bulb. And because our soils are so heavy, that depression collects water and that bulb ends up rotting, which is why tulips are sometimes short-lived for for Illinois gardeners. So what you can do, it's a bit of work, but it's worth it, is you can dig up that bulb, plant it sideways so it doesn't collect the water, and then geotrophism will pull the plant up and it will flower without rotting the bulb. I learned that tip from Martha Smith. Thank you very much for that tip.
And you would do that every year.
Every year.
Correct, like after it flowers.
And she also does that with hyacinth bulbs because I usually teach hyacinth bulbs as annuals because they tend not to come back.
That's true, yeah.
But she said that was the reason was they rot in our heavy soil. So if you were to, I know it's a little bit of extra work, but if you were to pull it out, plant it sideways, it'll even back up, and that's a way to keep your tulip and hyacinth bulbs reblooming year after year.
That's a good tip. I'll have to try it out, yeah. Huh.
So,
Very
Candice,
cool.
do you have...
So I was just telling you before we started, I just got my big shipment of bulbs because I grow a lot of tulips for cut flowers. And in that case, it's slightly different because what Kelly's talking about is you're planting those bulbs in the garden, and the idea is that they're going to be there for several years at least. They're perennials. They're going to come back every year. But in many cases, when you're growing a bulb for a cut flower, you basically treat it as an annual. So I order a bulk shipment of tulip bulbs in the fall, and they just came this week. So I'm going to wait till October to get them planted. But I plant them then in the raised beds. So the same raised beds that I'm growing my zinnias, my dahlias, that stuff. Once it's done, I'll clear that out, and then I'll plant the tulips into those beds. And like she was saying, I only plant them maybe 2-3 inches deep. They're very shallow, but they're also very close together. So I can butt those tulips up right next to each other, really close together, because in the spring, when I harvest them, you pull the whole bulb out. So I don't just cut the flower off of it. You pull the whole bulb out so that you have a really long stem. So in that case, since I pull the bulb out, then it's an annual. I'm not going to replant that bulb because I've just cut off all the foliage. So
and that's how park districts do it.
Exactly, yeah. And when you see those big mass plantings of tulips in a parkway, that's what they do. They plant them in the fall. Once they're done flowering, they rip them all out and compost them and take them out of there. Yeah, because they don't want to wait to let the foliage age and let that all store back into the bulb. So slightly different if you're doing cut flowers.
So if you were to give our viewers one more a tip, which I like that you planted them a little close together, what would you give them? What would you say?
For growing them for cut flowers? Or just in general?
Just
for
in
bulbs?
general.
Good tip. I would say get one, if you're doing a lot of plantings, get one of those drill bits, bulb planting drill bits you can put on the end of a drill. And so you can get those hand bulb planters, from the garden center where you squeeze it and it drops the soil. In our heavy clay soil, those never work great.
I don't like those.
Yeah, those never work great. So I would say they sell kind of big auger drill bits that you can put on the end of a drill and use that to make your holes, and that'll save you a whole lot of back breaking effort. That would be my tip. Make it easier on yourself.
My tip would be plant in mass.
Yeah. Group them together.
5 or 6 little bulbs. Yeah, pretty. Spring. But, like 50 bulbs, now that is show-stopping.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ryan?
I agree. 50 bulbs is better than 5. Yeah.
Ryan does not plant many bulbs, as he admitted to us
I've
earlier.
been a real bulb gardener.
I mean, should we give Ryan some
we
tulip
need to
bulbs?
send him home with some bulbs here.
Got an assignment now, I guess.
Okay, so we've had a couple questions come in about bulbs. So one question about any recommendations for dealing with squirrels, and then another reply for chipmunks as well.
Well, definitely don't use the bone meal.
Yes, right.
Because that tends to be an attractant to some of that wildlife.
So don't put that in. Don't skip the bone meal. Don't put it in the hole. What else could you do for squirrels and chipmunks?
I've heard people say this, but they'll put wire over the bulbs that they planted, and then the bulbs and the bulb foliage will come up through the wire. I've never personally done that. I think it would be rather cumbersome.
Yeah, I've never tried that either, but that's really the only recommendation I've ever heard. Is you
Dog?
either put chicken wire on the top of the soil, or some people will go real over their top and they'll make kind of a wire cage to go around the bulb itself if they have a lot of problems.
So you're kind of fencing the squirrels out of the soil surface.
Yeah, basically.
Squirrels are hard to deter. I think you mentioned dog.
Yeah, dog.
An animal to chase them away.
My dogs have done a pretty good job.
Yeah, my dog does a really good job.
Yeah. Yep.
But yes, I think if horticulturists could come up with the solution for rabbits and squirrels, we would be rich.
We would. Any rodent pest in the garden, we would be.
But unfortunately, how do you get rid of squirrels?
Yeah. Or deer or any of them. Yeah.
Well, and important to mention that they're protected animals.
That's true.
You have to be careful what you do to squirrels.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Holly also had a question for me about getting bulbs in bulk if you want 1,000 at a time. Holly, there's a lot of different sources out there. Just do a Google search for bulk bulbs or wholesale bulbs, and you'll come up with a whole lot of companies that you can get options for.
Yeah.
And definitely go online or a catalog. A garden center is going to sell them in 10s, 12s, kind of smaller quantities. So go online. You'll find a lot of sources for that. Okay, Holly had also a couple other questions here kind of related to bulbs. What is the temperature and moisture for storing dahlia bulbs, canna bulbs, tulips, potatoes? So she's got a couple different categories here. So dahlias and cannas you could lump together. Those are what we call summer bulbs. So those are in the ground now. They're growing great. But unlike the tulip or the daffodil or the spring flowering bulbs, they're not going to survive the winter. So you have to dig those up at the end of the season and store them for the winter. So in terms of temperature, moisture, Holly, you want to keep them cool but above freezing. So ideally kind of in that 40-degree range, kind of less than 50 degrees is kind of what you're going for. And you want to keep them fairly cool and dry. Too much moisture and they're going to rot. Too high of a temperature and they're going to use up all their energy. And they're going to be dried up and shriveled by the time spring comes. So keep them cool, a basement, a heated garage. In my case, I have a walk-in cooler that I put them in for the winter. Most people aren't going to have that, of course. So a basement is usually kind of your best spot.
Okay? So like the coolest corner of your basement.
Exactly. Yep. Keep them cool, keep them dry. And then she also asked about tulips. And a similar question here, if spring and summer bulbs went unplanted, so let's say a stargazer lily, should she plant them now, or do they need the seasonal bloom in order to produce next season? So let's say somebody had a lily that they've had all summer and they haven't gotten it planted. Should they plant it now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree because if you tried to store it for another season, for another winter, more than likely it's going to use up all of its energy stores, and
that makes sense.
It's going to be dried up by
Sometimes
next spring.
I really like planting things in the fall because, what we learned in our horticulture classes was as long as the soil's diggable, you can plant a tree. I mean, you can plant a plant, excuse me.
Yeah,
probably a tree as well.
True.
So, most people want to plant in late spring, early summer, and it's really hot and dry. So planting in cooler weather, actually, you're going to have a little bit less transplant shock. I would make sure that my roots weren't root bound, even though I'm not a big fan of ripping up roots. But if they are root bound in there, you need to slice them. Almost, like a box cut. But, that's a really good, any perennial you still have, planted in the ground. And it leads to Ryan, because fall is actually an amazing time to plant trees too.
That is true.
It's definitely my favorite time to plant trees. Some of the reason being it's not super hot and dry. You don't have to worry about a lot of follow-up watering. And those trees get in the ground now, they lose their leaves if they're deciduous. But they actually still have root growth over the wintertime. So a little bit of root growth happens over the wintertime when temperatures are right, and then when the spring rains hit, that tree is ready to leaf out and really get going for the year, as opposed to a spring planting, which is the other probably most typical time you might plant a tree. And in that case, you're ripping that tree out of its pot and putting it in the ground in the spring. And yeah, we have a lot of moisture and rainfall, but it didn't have those winter months to kind of acclimate, for soil to settle, for mycorrhizae to find the roots and other things. So yeah, fall is a great time. Very true what Kelly said, probably with trees, that anytime the soil is workable, you can plant a tree. Now, the problem is if you plant it in July, you're going to have to really water that thing to, it's going to be in transplant shock when it gets put in the ground. And if you can't get water to it, then it's going to suffer. So that's typically why we focused on, fall and spring as planting times. But
we've got a question that's come in on that. Sure. And then we got some other ones too. Any trees that do not like fall planting? Can you think of any that you wouldn't want to do in the fall?
I don't know. I guess I can't really think of any that I wouldn't particularly plant in the fall. I think I've seen kind of lists of trees that do better in spring and fall before, and I don't remember ever being able to kind of pick out a difference between those species. Yeah. So I don't know if there's really science behind some of those lists that are out there. So yeah, I can't think of one that I would rather plant in the spring other than the fall. The fall really is just my favorite time for tree planting. I think the spring planting happens a lot because, quite honestly, that's when a lot of plant material is available in garden centers and other places.
True.
They really don't stock up as much in the fall. So, some of that's kind of driven by the horticulture industry also. But yeah, I can't think of one that I would, strongly recommend you should plant in the spring as opposed to the fall.
Okay. Awesome. Well, we've got one more tree question, and then we'll go back to some of our previous ones. Keep these questions coming. This one's for Ryan. Sarah says, we have no trees on our property because all of the ash have died. They want to start planting again, but can't afford $500 trees. Do you recommend an online shop like Arbor Day or something where they could buy small trees from and plant this fall? They're looking for things like bald cypress, white pine, arborvitae, fir. Can you think of any kind of fall sales?
The East Central Illinois Master Naturalists just had their fall sale close a week ago. So here in Champaign-Urbana, the group of Master Naturalists that are active here have a fall tree and shrub sale where you can order throughout the summer online and then pickups in October. But ordering for that just closed in September. I don't know of another one locally here. I know we could have viewers throughout the state that's going on, but you could certainly look for some conservation groups that may be having some of those sales. I know some of the soil and water conservation districts have sales of those type of plants in the fall.
Or
that may
or
be
maybe
someplace to look.
Contact your local, like if you have a wild ones group local, they might have some connections.
A couple wild ones. Yeah, I know of a few wild ones groups around Central Illinois that have some fall sales.
Yeah. Or honestly, a lot of garden centers start to discount things in the fall too, which can actually be kind of helpful.
Now, as far as what type of plant material to seek out, my favorite type of plant material for woody plants is a 3 to 5 gallon pot containerized plant as opposed to a large balled and burlapped plant. And I just did an extensive search for bald cypress in particular in container plants and had a really hard time finding it. I actually found it from a supplier in Southern Illinois, somebody that I know that grows and propagates native plants. But at the garden centers, it was hard to find. I could find it balled and burlapped at nurseries, but that's a $200 or $300 plant.
But not smaller, yeah.
And honestly, in my experience with bigger balled and burlap things, I just find that they're in transplant shock for an extended period of time. They take a lot of, nursing along and watering to really get established compared to those containerized, potted plants that you can plant. Now, to go down a step to something even smaller, you can get bare root seedlings. Those just start so small. I feel like a lot of folks don't get a lot of satisfaction out of planting a little stick.
Yeah, takes a while.
I've planted those as well. They are very seasonally available, though, because they're based on, when those plants are available. They have to be dug at a certain time of year while the plants are in dormancy, and so it's usually springtime that those bare root seedlings will be available. But the state of Illinois does run a nursery that has a ton of native species on their list. Sometimes you have to buy by the bundle of 100 trees from there. So, a lot of the bare root seedling suppliers aren't really set up to supply you on a smaller scale.
Yeah.
I think she mentioned Arbor Day Foundation. They do supply, I believe it's like if you join, they give you 10 trees or something. If you're interested in native stuff, be careful of that list. There's sometimes some not native trees on that list.
Sure.
Just depends on what you're going for. All those trees usually are well adapted to our area, but they're going to come as little bulb or bare root seedlings is what you'll get in that case. Nothing wrong with that. You're just starting with a really much smaller tree. I sometimes feel like those get a better start, develop a better root system, have less transplant shock and issue. And I don't know, it would be interesting to look at a study between bare root seedlings, containerized plants, and bald and burlap trees.
How fast they grow.
Yeah, what's the biggest, what do you have 20 years later out of those three? And
I'm sure somebody's looking at that.
That's what I feel about like 4-inch perennials versus a gallon perennial. I feel like after the 3 years, you can't tell the difference.
They grow quick enough that
But let me give you a tip. And I used to be in the garden center industry, and you need to communicate with your favorite garden centers. They want to make you happy. And if enough people, it could be even 2 or 3 people, say, I'm interested in containerized trees, and the same with native plants. I would like to see more native plants. They will, they may not be able to order it for you right away, but the following season they may up their order of certain things that you would be interested in, almost thinking you're a representative of all of their clients. So, talk to your favorite garden center.
I've definitely seen that to be true, and I've actually been surprised a few different garden centers have been able to get things for me, yet in the fall that they didn't have in stock. So always worth asking, definitely.
Very good. Awesome. Well, we've had a ton of questions come in, so I'm going to scroll back here and get to some of them. So going back to some questions earlier when we were talking about bulbs, talking about storing potatoes. So like if you harvest potatoes from the garden, how would you store them? And can you save the tubers to plant for next year? So you vegetable guys, what would you do?
I haven't had good luck trying to save my own potatoes. I don't know if you have.
I've never tried it personally myself.
I guess I should say trying to save them to plant for next year. I've had pretty good luck keeping them cool and dry, kind of like a bulb in my basement, and I've had them last well into fall. Maybe Thanksgiving time or so, I was starting to use them up. So just there's nothing special going on in my basement. It's a little cooler than the upstairs. I think the dryness is a huge issue where they're stored. And so we have a dehumidifier that runs in my basement. I try and store them kind of close to that dehumidifier where I feel like it's more dehumidified than the far back corner of the basement per se. But that's been my experience with storing potatoes. I've often thought about trying to build just the perfect conditions for that in my basement somehow. If I could I think you probably need to cool it down a little bit more than where my basement is.
And get that dehumidifier,
another method is the good old-fashioned pioneer method of storing them in the soil. I have never tried it, but I know of folks that have had great success in storing those potatoes in the soil. So
well, as far as storing them to eat them, yes, I have the same problem. I eat them up before.
True.
However long they're supposed to be stored. But as far as storing them to plant them again, the seed potatoes in the industry are just so cheap that it's so really easy to not worth it.
From the garden center.
Just go buy new, healthy potatoes.
I've found in my basement conditions, sometime after about Thanksgiving or in there, they start to not be good anymore. So I know I couldn't plant them because I've tried to save little handfuls, to try and plant myself just for the fun of it. But I definitely agree that just buy the seed potatoes. Either at your local garden centers have them. I tend to order specialty.
So you got order from your seed
because I'm picky.
Seed catalogs you like.
Yeah.
Great. Well, hope that helps you, Sarah. We go rolling back to one of our first questions here from Janice. She has raised garden beds that grass and weeds grow quite well in. She's heard that if you put a tarp over them over the winter and take it off in the spring, it might work to eliminate some of the weeds and grass. What's our opinion on doing this? So covering them up for the winter, basically, to kind of smother out.
I think that's
I think it's a great idea, too.
It's a great idea, too.
When I first started this job, I heard this thing called soil sterilization. And what you did is you put clear plastic and then you used the sun. But then I started slowly realizing that we don't have bright enough sun in Illinois for it to actually get the benefits. But choking it out with black plastic, where it doesn't get any sun or any water, I think can be really effective.
Yeah, I think so too.
I've
So
had
I say
great
go
success
for it,
with
Jan.
that.
And you can even do like cardboard, just
I've
layer
done that.
cardboard and newspapers.
Yeah.
You don't even have to use plastic.
Yeah, try it out, Janice. I think it'll help you.
Yeah.
Okay, another question kind of regarding winter time. Best way to keep geraniums over the winter. She did not have luck last year. So, couple strategies. I know some people do. So you can bring them in, try to treat them as a house plant, basically. So you could keep them in a container, put them in by a bright window, water them all winter, and kind of keep them going. Some people will take them down into a basement and just kind of let them go dormant, basically, for the winter. I know some people even shake off all the soil and put them in a paper bag, and they have good luck with that. What I would do most of the time is bring them in, keep them growing, but then take cuttings from them so that you have smaller plants to deal with, and then you can grow those on for the next season. That's what I would do instead of trying to keep a big geranium plant alive. Kelly, would you? Would you do something different?
Not the hugest fan of geraniums.
Me either, but people
and
like to keep them.
I get the appeal of the wonderful colors. Again, I'm like this industry person. Like it's almost, like keeping over stuff just seems so much trouble. I'd rather just go out and buy a fresh new plant. But I have saved a geranium before, and you know what I did? Put it in a black trash bag and put it in my basement.
Like I said, a lot of people
Hold
do.
it out in the spring, cut it back. It was fine. That's all I did. So I don't know if that's scientifically based. That's what I've done.
Yeah, she said she tried the paper bag method last year and it dried out too much. So in that case, Sarah,
Maybe
you might
the black plastic bag
plastic
would
has
keep.
put it in a different type of bag that would hold more moisture in it, possibly. Yeah, and just see. Nice thing is that you're not out anything. It was going to die anyways.
Yeah.
So if you bring it in and try it, it's at least
kind of a fun experiment.
Worth a shot. Yeah. Okay, a couple more questions here. Keep them coming. Holly's asking, can I split lilac bushes in the fall even though there's new growth on the twigs? So would now be a good time to split a lilac bush.
Lilacs are not traditionally something you would divide. They're more something you would prune.
Yeah, it kind of depends how your lilac is growing, but they typically don't have a... there's usually some growth, like side growth coming from the base, but
I guess we should...
You can sometimes find little sprouts under them, but as far as dividing the whole bush or digging and transplanting the whole shrub, that would be difficult. But I have had success digging the little root suckers that come up.
Okay.
Little side growth.
Yeah, you have to have a really... So I'm assuming you have a really healthy,
So it's got new growth on it, so it must be...
Yeah, so that's the route I would go, is trying to dig those little root suckers that pop up underneath it. I haven't had good luck with stem cuttings. I've tried dormant cuttings in the wintertime and haven't had good luck with that.
It's just too woody, I think, like not...
I mean, I kind of tried as an experiment and later read some research that showed a better way to do that is during the growing season, a live cutting with leaves. And I've tried that with other plants and just have not had good success because you're snipping off a stem with leaves. It needs to quickly get roots going to support those leaves. And so in the meantime, you need to keep the leaves really humid and moist and water in the pots. And I just haven't been able to upkeep with that type of upkeep. So for me, anything I'm going to try to propagate myself is usually through dormant cuttings in the wintertime. So for me, what I've kind of concluded from my own experimentation with lilac is I need to try and find those little root suckers and dig those to propagate it. So
give that a try, Holly, and see if you have success there. She's also got another tree question for you here. She said they dug 1-year-old oak volunteers 3 different times this year and all died when in a container. What's the trick to success for timing of moving to a new location? 1-year-old oak volunteers.
Little oak seedlings are difficult to transplant. I'm disappointed to report that because Just that oak trees by nature put more energy into root growth than shoot growth in their younger years, so I felt like they would be good to transplant. I've had the best luck in total winter dormancy. So, after January sometime, maybe in February when the soils kind of thaw out and they're not super mucky and wet, trying to dig those up and just get as much of those roots as you can out of there. There's a time when a certain soil moisture level where you can easily get a round point shovel under there and kind of pop the plant up and get that soil to crumble and really just kind of almost pull out a bare root seedling out of the soil then, as opposed to trying to take a big wad of soil with it. You wind up cutting off so many other roots. There's certainly an optimal size of oak seedling that you can get. And it's basically one that has a small enough root system you can grab and not a lot of top growth, so it's going to be a little short guy.
So you may need to mark them with this, kind of go through and flag the ones that you want to try to do that with, because the leaves are going to be gone, obviously.
That's a great way to do it, is to flag them this time of year and wait till February and dig those, and just as quickly as you can get it out of the ground and in the new spot, make that move. Exposing those roots to sun is really detrimental to any of those bare root seedlings like that, so try and keep them in the shade, move them quick, and get them in their new spot. I've done them into pots with really even less luck than just transplanting them right into the ground right away. I've probably had better luck in pots with acorns that I planted then in the fall and let overwinter in the pot and grow. So that's kind of my personal experience with oak seedlings.
Couple strategies to try there, and hopefully one of those will work for you. Okay, question from Lynn. She said she has her information about rain gardens and is very interested in starting one, but the location is on a slope and not necessarily where rain will settle. Would it be possible to still plant a rain garden on a slope, or should I consider something else? So, Lynn, a slope is actually good. You want some slope on a rain garden, moving away from the house. But what you're going to have to do, kind of where you want that rain garden to end, where you want the rain to settle, is you're going to have to build up almost a berm kind of area, basically to stop that rain. So I've built several before on the corner of the house, and it's never been a steep slope, so it kind of depends how steep of a slope you're talking. But basically what I did is I just brought in some extra soil and built up, like I said, kind of a berm or a ridge along the outside edge of that rain garden so that it could hold water for a period of time. Because that's the idea, is that you want that rain garden to fill up with water so that it can slowly trickle into the soil. So you're gonna have to do something to stop the rain and keep it just from continuing.
I think what I've learned from rain gardens is to not fight the natural topography either.
Exactly.
Figure out where water is kind of coming down that slope, and you're just going to try and intercept and catch it into a small rain garden. But if you get into too much engineering of trying to get water to where you're putting your little berm up, you've kind of destroyed the point of a rain garden, which is meant to just slow that storm flow of water that's entering all the stream systems. So it might mean that you're installing rocks, or you're installing something along that slope to slow down that rain, and then wherever it eventually ends up, that's where you might build more of that rain garden in terms of planting. It all just kind of depends on how much slope you're talking. There's definitely a spot that could be too steep. For what a rain garden really needs to do. But
that's a great question. Another question from Holly. What cultivars of sweet cherry do well in Zone 5? And I know I certainly don't know off the top of my head, but if you head over to we have a Small Fruits in the Backyard, I believe it's called, website, that'll have some recommended cultivars on there. That would be your best. That would be your best bet. I don't grow sweet cherries, so couldn't tell you.
I don't really either. Or any that I know of that any of my family members have, I don't know the variety.
But I know we do have some on that fruits website, so we'll get that link in the comments for you there.
And there's a fruit production book that I use at the office. I can't remember.
Yeah, is it like Midwest Fruit Production? I think Ohio State puts it out. Yeah.
I don't know if maybe they'd have that type of information.
They might. Yeah,
they
probably would. Yeah.
One thing I always recommend when planting fruit trees is to really look for disease-resistant varieties. There's been a lot of work in the last several decades to develop a lot of disease resistance in newer varieties, where a lot of the just run-of-the-mill fruit tree varieties you get at a just really general big box store don't have those type of disease resistance characteristics. So as you're researching, I mean, I think our website would probably point out some of those characteristics, but as you're looking at other places, look for something that has some disease resistance to fire blight and some of the other stuff.
Yeah, and do some searching for fruit nurseries kind of in the Midwest or in states close to us. And they're going to have good recommendations in there too of varieties, just making sure they're hardy to zone 5 and then looking for some of those disease resistances. Yeah.
And if the search seems daunting, you can always go to your Master Gardener help desk and they'll do that research for you and look through some of those materials.
Give you
so we should talk about that for a second, that a lot of extension units have a Master Gardener help desk available to anyone from the general public that calls. I know Bloomington has one, Champaign has one.
Most counties do.
We have a help desk in all 3 of our counties.
Decatur does. Most counties do, and a lot of times they have a set day or days of the week that they're there, so you can go during their set periods of times and you'll see them in person. Otherwise, you can pretty much call anytime during the week, during office hours, leave a message, and they'll get back to you within a couple days. So,
And there's a group of Master Gardeners at each one of these hotlines that does research and figures out those varieties we can recommend to you. So
absolutely.
And it is not their job to know. It is their job to research. So they may be, you may present them with a potential issue in your garden and they don't know how to answer it, but then they'll go through all the little research avenues that they have and they'll prepare an answer for you. They can identify plants for you. You have plants in the garden that you can't identify or you want to know what it is or how to take care of it. You take a really nice focused picture and they can probably answer it. Even, certain insect issues, sometimes diseases are hard, but
they do a good amount of disease ID, or they have access to a network of resources like us as hort educators and other folks on campus, and so they're very good at tracking down an answer if they don't know it right off the top of their head.
So they'll help you out.
I think our Achilles heel in my help desk is weeds in the spring.
What is this weed?
I'll have like a little tiny weed that has 3 leaves on it, and they'll be like, "What is this weed?" And I'm like, I couldn't even guess.
And how do I control it? What do I do?
Well, and my next question is, what are you going to do with it? Oh, I just want to know. But yeah, weeds can be quite difficult to identify in the spring. But other than that, we're really good at identifying things.
We'll find somebody to get the answer, Okay, we've got a question from Christine. Any experience with heirloom roses? She planted some this spring, and they suffered this summer with spotted leaves and very few blooms and little growth. I'm not much of a rose grower, but I imagine if it's an heirloom, that means it probably has 0 disease resistance to it, which is probably why you're seeing those spotted leaves, black spot. There's many different fungal pathogens that will affect roses, especially after that wet spring we had.
It was a bad spring.
Yeah, it was a bad spring for diseases. So, so honestly, Christine, you're going to have to really just kind of keep an eye on that rose. And if you're noticing that some of these diseases are happening every season or happening every year, there are certain spray schedules for roses. And if you're really looking to grow a high quality rose, if that's your goal, then you're probably going to need some fungicides and some things like that. Or if obviously heirlooms are great, but if you're just wanting to grow a rose, then maybe you swap it out for something that does have a little more disease resistance to it and it's a little more low maintenance.
I'm a big advocate. If I have to work that hard for a plant in my garden, it's gone. So we always say, right plant for the right place. It just, some of this intensive gardening that people have traditionally done in the past just seems like a lot of work. And, these plant breeders, like Ryan said, have done all this work for us. And so even though we love the heirloom roses and even the heirloom vegetables, some of the newer varieties have more disease resistance. Like a knockout rose, it's not, the rose, it's not going to get some of the other problems that roses get.
Yeah. you got to weigh your options. If there's a sentimental value to that heirloom, if there's a reason you're growing the heirloom, then it might be worth it to do those things. If not, then maybe go for something that's more
maybe we're just addressing the philosophy and not really addressing your issue.
Yes,
it's because we don't know.
But there's a lot of folks out there that have figured it out.
Yeah, absolutely. And a great resource would be like your local rose society. Many counties, many groups have local rose societies that's what they grow. It's a lot of heirlooms, so you might be better off checking with a local group of rose growers, and they might have more specifics for that particular variety.
Yeah, the Champaign County Master Gardeners have a rose section in the Idea Garden here on campus, and some of those ladies are expert level in what to do with roses. So you just need to get connected with a group that kind of has a few folks like that, and I'm sure once you start to kind of discuss your issues, they really quickly can rattle off all those solutions to the diseases, different diseases.
Okay, question here from Sarah. Powdery mildew on cucumber and squash. What's your favorite way to prevent and treat this problem? And one that's organic and safe. She tried a diluted vinegar spray the other day, but the plants are already dying. Powdery mildew on cucumber and squash.
I like using insecticidal soap. It actually has fungicidal properties that most people don't know that insecticidal soap can be used for that. I'm not an advocate of using home remedies. Actually, University of Illinois extension educators are not supposed to advocate for those because we don't know what they do. Even though you think vinegar is safe, how do I know that insecticidal soap is not safer?
Because we don't know what rate is being applied at. We don't know what's,
So, not that you can't do it, but not a big advocate. But with powdery mildew, you have to get it in the beginning. You can't cure it. I mean, even if I were to spray, let's say you have, 75% powdery mildew cover, it's done. If you had like 30%, then maybe you could do an insecticidal soap treatment and maybe follow up 7 to 10 days later, and you'd be preventing some of the spread. Another thing I like doing is trimming off some of the really powdery leaves.
Cleaning them up a little.
Yeah, I've done that.
But it's the end of the season.
At this point, you're not going to get any.
I know powdery mildew, doesn't powdery mildew overwinter in the soil?
So you would plant material, isn't it? I don't know.
Is it saprophyte?
I feel like it's on, but I could be wrong.
Well, clean up the plant material.
Clean up
the plant material.
Clean up the garden.
That's for sure. Clean up the plant material. And maybe next year, look for some cucumbers that have powdery mildew resistance.
Exactly. Yeah, and if you do start to notice it in the spring, nip it in the bud early. Trim out those parts. Try the insecticidal soap.
I've done pretty
Increase
good
the airflow in that area.
I've done pretty good with preventative pruning. A lot of times, trying to get ahead of it. You probably open up a little more airflow in there too with that. That helps.
Yep.
So.
Maybe even trellis.
Work on
get them trellising next year.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have a really good book, Vegetable Gardening in the Midwest, that actually has some cultivar information, and it'll say this is disease resistant. I love referring to that book. That could be one of the books that you refer to, and maybe not all those cultivars are going to be available for seed in a box store, but you could order that kind of stuff online.
Yeah, it's a great resource.
Yeah, it is. It goes through kind of the common diseases and things you see, and a little bit of solutions for that. And
I love the cultivar list in the book.
That's a great one to reference. Awesome. Okay, we've got 5 minutes left, so if you got any lingering gardening questions, get them into the comments. We've got one final question here from Matthew. When would be the best time to plant a native plant garden? He wants to do a small plot of milkweed and native prairie plants. And then also, secondary question, what would be a native ground cover? So best time to plant a native garden. He wants to do milkweeds, native prairie plants, and then a native ground cover.
I would say now, but you're not going to find the native plants now, unfortunately. Sorry about that. But Candice, we keep referring to the wild ones. They're just really
We
great
do.
organization that promote native plants. And so one of the ways they do this is they have native plant cells in the spring.
Mm-hmm.
So you Google wild ones and find out where your local one is and go to their plant cell, and you will have you don't even have to go, is this native? It's
They're
native.
all native, yeah.
And then they will give you information on how to plant and how this plant grows. And they're really cheap, to be perfectly honest, too.
And at
Yeah,
least
they
in
are.
our Bloomington wild ones, they're usually small plants too, so they don't have. It's budget friendly. You're not buying big kind of 1 gallon.
You're buying
2
these
gallon.
little 2-inch, sometimes a tube, which I don't think makes a difference in the long run.
Well, actually-
probably availability is when you're going to plant it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
and
now is great, but you may not find the plants so much.
And I just
Yeah.
spoke to the Bloomington Wild Ones group on Tuesday night, and they do have, if you're in the Bloomington area, they have a fall sale.
Oh, do
that
they?
they're
So I didn't even know
organizing.
that.
So
Whoa.
talk to those guys if you're around Bloomington.
We're
But
gonna
yeah,
have to look it up.
I think they're a great resource for plant sales, both spring and fall.
Mm-hmm.
I think you'll find though, like a lot of the sales are in the spring, so that kind of leads you
Yeah.
to want to establish from plants in the spring. But
Now, what about this here? When would you? So if he's wanting to do milkweed, he could harvest seed right now.
So
right?
what I would do is I would take all this seed, I would put it in a cup with a quarter to knock all this floss off.
So I brought a butterfly weed plant today to talk about kind of fall bloomers, and the pod has opened up with all of these fluffy milkweed seeds. Whoop.
Ryan, could you-
Which many
Yeah,
of
let
the
me give you a
milkweeds are
background
gonna
there.
be doing right now.
Oh, the shirt's good. Okay.
So
There you
I
go.
just, I would put this in a cup. That quarter would probably knock it all off, but you want these seeds to come off. You don't want the floss. The floss is actually meant to carry it in the wind. And then you plant these seeds right now in the
Yeah,
fall.
plant them in the fall.
And you will have milkweed pop up all over your shirt.
And these are what those pods look like before they're ready. Once you know they're ready when they start to pop open and all the seeds start to come
Now,
out.
butterfly weed is most preferred by gardeners because it's really vivid orange, nice and compact.
Shorter.
But swamp milkweed is actually the most preferred by monarchs.
Oh man, it's one of my favorites too.
Yeah.
Just a really pretty flower. It's fragrant. I didn't realize that till the last couple of years here that it's a pretty fragrant flower. You can smell it.
The common milkweed is almost more fragrant than swamp milkweed. It
Yeah.
knocks me. I'll be like, oh my gosh, what is that?
Pretty good.
But
So
yeah,
so Matthew, you might try starting some of those milkweed seeds now, getting your site ready, getting some of those milkweed seeds planted, and then check out some of those plant cells maybe in the spring to kind of finish off with the other
And native
prairie
ground
plants.
cover.
Oh yeah, how about that? Yep, and then we've got one final question.
Native ground cover.
What would like wild ginger?
Wild ginger,
Yeah,
I
that's a
think
great
that
one.
one's a gorgeous one. Wild ginger. We have a website that's dedicated to ground covers. I don't know if it necessarily says it's native,
I don't know
but
if it does either, but that'd be a good place to start. I think it's called Ground Covers and More. Yeah.
even though they're kind of ephemeral, your wild bluebells kind of cover the
Yeah.
ground.
yeah, they're kind of a ground cover.
Yeah.
Native,
You
though,
know.
Yeah,
that's what's throwing me
that's the
off.
harder one.
You know, I think that like a shorter prairie grass, like prairie drop seed,
Oh,
when
yeah.
it really
Yeah,
gets
that would work.
established,
Oh, yeah, you
is
could-
kind of
that'd
a
be a
nice,
great ground cover.
nice ground cover. I view it as a ground cover. It's probably we got some milkweed. It's probably about that tall.
Yeah, 2
you
feet
know,
maybe with
big
all its
puffball,
foliage.
but it kind of
And honestly, you could do a big old planting of butterfly. A big old planting of butterfly weed too would cover in an area would be beautiful.
yeah, and it wouldn't be that tall.
And it'd be 18,
so
24
yeah, it's
inches, so.
interesting. Like I always think a ground cover, like a non-native like English ivy or something
Yeah.
that just covers the ground and is real short. But lots of things can be a ground cover.
Yeah, they don't have to necessarily be short.
It just depends on how you maintain the plant material too, and how you promote it to grow. So
Cool. Okay, we've got one last question before we sign off for the day. Michael's asking the best way to harvest celery. What's the best way to harvest
I
celery?
always teach that celery's hard to grow.
I know.
So
I
I've
know.
never personally grown it. I heard that it gets lots of sand and you really have to clean it up. But yeah, Ryan.
Yeah, I have to admit I haven't ever grown celery.
I haven't either. And I imagine you'd harvest the whole thing at once.
Yeah, you just pull it out of the ground.
Yeah.
Basically harvest the entire plant, and then you'd have to do a good job, like you said, of washing it well. You'd probably want to cut it up from that point and then start to kind of wash it and get it clean.
I mean, I would definitely think you'd pull it out of the ground.
I would think so too. Check a couple links up. That Vegetable Gardening in the Midwest book is going to tell you exactly, because if each of the vegetables in there, it tells you how to harvest it. So
it has harvesting records.
Definitely check that out. Awesome. Okay, well, you guys killed it with questions today. We love it. Thank you so much for bringing all your gardening questions to us. We'll be back in early October for another round of Facebook Live with the Horticulturists. So start saving up those questions, and we'll definitely get those answered for you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Have a good rest of the week.